scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning when Peppa and George woke up to find their house completely silent. No sounds of Mummy Pig making breakfast, no cheerful humming from Daddy Pig reading his newspaper. The silence felt thick and wrong, like a blanket that was too heavy to breathe under. Peppa tiptoed down the stairs, her little hooves making no sound on the wooden steps. The living room looked exactly the same as always. The purple sofa, the yellow walls, the familiar pictures hanging in their golden frames. But something was different. The pictures were moving. Not obviously, just tiny movements at the edges of her vision. George followed behind her, clutching his dinosaur toy tighter than usual. The toy's plastic eyes seemed to follow their movements, and its mouth appeared to be opening and closing in tiny, silent roars. George tried to put the dinosaur down, but his hands wouldn't let go. The toy had somehow fused with his fingers. They found Mummy and Daddy Pig in the kitchen, sitting at the breakfast table with their backs turned. Peppa called out to them, but they didn't respond. When she walked around to face them, she saw they were smiling their usual warm smiles, but their eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils. The entire eyes were dark voids that seemed to pull light into them. Mummy Pig's voice came out in her normal, cheerful tone, but her mouth wasn't moving. The words seemed to come from somewhere behind her, or maybe from inside the walls themselves. She was talking about having a lovely day, about going to visit Grandpa and Grandma Pig, but the words kept repeating over and over like a broken record. Daddy Pig stood up from his chair, and as he did, Peppa noticed his shadow on the wall was wrong. While Daddy Pig was standing upright, his shadow was still sitting down, and it was waving at them with movements that didn't match what Daddy Pig was doing with his hands. The house began to feel smaller. The walls seemed to be moving inward, just slightly, just enough to make the rooms feel cramped and airless. The ceiling was getting lower too, and Peppa had to duck her head, even though she had never needed to before. Outside the window, the familiar green hills of their neighborhood were still there, but the other houses had vanished. In their place stood identical copies of their own house, stretching as far as the eye could see. Each house had the same yellow door, the same red roof, and in each window, Peppa could see herself and George, looking back at her. The telephone rang, its shrill sound cutting through the strange quiet. Peppa answered it and heard her own voice on the other end, but the words were all wrong. The voice that sounded like hers was telling her to come outside, to join the other Peppas, to become part of the endless row of identical houses. George tried to speak, but when he opened his mouth, no sound came out. Instead, tiny versions of himself began climbing out from between his teeth, each one smaller than the last. All of them silent and staring with the same black eyes that Mummy and Daddy Pig now had.